My wedding anniversary with James was approaching, and this year, I felt something electric in the air, an almost nervous excitement that came through in his voice. James had been busy lately more than usual, with long nights at the office and business trips that seemed to come up on a whim. But despite the erratic schedule, he kept hinting at a surprise he was preparing for me, something that would take my breath away. I clung to those words, letting them be the anchor that kept me steady on days when I'd grown weary from his absence. Our 10th anniversary was monumental. It wasn't something to be glossed over, and he knew that as well as I did. We'd been through so much together. Career highs, family tragedies, and every shade of joy and hardship. After 10 years, I still craved those small gestures that reassured me he was as invested as I was. When the day arrived, he was there home early, dressed impeccably in his favorite navy suit, holding a delicate ribbon-tied box from one of the most luxurious jewelry brands in town. His eyes sparkled with excitement as he handed it to me, almost boyish in his anticipation. I opened the box slowly, savoring each moment, and then, nestled in velvet, was the most beautiful necklace I'd ever seen. A radiant diamond necklace, elegant but not overstated, with an intricate design that caught the light with every slight movement. It was the kind of piece a woman could only dream of owning. "Oh, James," I whispered, barely finding my voice. "It's perfect." He leaned in, pulling me close, his fingers grazing the back of my neck as he fastened the clasp, the diamonds catching the evening light as they fell against my collarbone. For a brief moment, all my doubts and the lingering unease I'd been suppressing vanished. This was proof of his love, a tangible declaration that I still mattered to him as much as I always had. But fate has a way of unearthing secrets when you least expect it. A few days later, I attended a charity gala alone since James claimed he couldn't make it due to another urgent business trip. I wasn't thrilled to go by myself, but the event was important to our circle, and I thought it would be a good distraction. I slipped into a black dress, simple enough to let the diamond necklace be the centerpiece. I had to admit, every time I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror, I felt beautiful, as if the necklace held some transformative power. The venue was stunning, filled with glittering chandeliers, and a well-dressed crowd mingling with glasses of champagne. I was deep in conversation with an old friend when I noticed a woman across the room. She looked strikingly familiar. A little too familiar, actually. She was around my age, with a confident posture and a gaze that held a curious warmth. But it wasn't her face that caught my attention, it was her necklace. My stomach twisted as I recognized it instantly. The same necklace. Not just similar but identical in every delicate detail, down to the exact unique cut of the diamonds. It was impossible. Jewelry like this wasn't mass-produced. Each piece was a unique masterpiece, meant to make the woman wearing it feel like there was no one else in the world with something quite like it. My heart hammered as I began connecting the dots. There was only one explanation, one that was too dreadful to entertain but impossible to ignore. I watched as she laughed, oblivious to my staring, her hand brushing the diamonds as she leaned into the man beside her. They were close, standing almost as if they were the only two people in the room. I didn't want to approach her, but my legs moved on their own, carrying me across the room. She noticed me coming toward her and greeted me with a warm smile, assuming I was just another friendly face at the gala. I forced a smile back and complimented her necklace, keeping my tone light. "Oh, thank you," she beamed, her fingers grazing the stones. "My partner gave it to me as an anniversary gift," she said, her eyes softening at the mention of him. My chest tightened. "What a thoughtful gift," I murmured, barely able to keep my voice steady. "Must be a special man." Her smile faltered, her eyes narrowing slightly, as if she sensed something in my voice. But before she could respond, I felt a firm hand on my shoulder. I didn't need to turn to know who it was. James. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. His face had lost its color, the realization dawning on him in the same instant that it hit me. He was caught and there was no denying it. He looked from me to her, his mouth opening and closing, but no words came out. She stared at him, confusion clouding her expression, but I could see the seeds of doubt starting to sprout in her eyes, the recognition of the uncomfortable truth. Her gaze turned to me, then back to him, a faint horror dawning in her face. "So," I said quietly, my voice barely a whisper but piercing in the heavy silence, Which one of us did you mean to surprise? James stammered, desperate to explain, but every word only deepened the wounds. The woman, who I now knew was his mistress, let out a hollow laugh, a sound filled with betrayal. She stormed out of the room, leaving James to face the mess he'd created. I stood there, my hands cold, the weight of the necklace suddenly unbearable against my skin. As I looked at him, a man I thought I knew so well, I realized that this was the end of our story as I'd known it. He tried to reach for me, pleading, but I stepped back. The room spun, memories of our life together flashing before me, now tainted with a shadow that couldn't be erased. I walked out of that gala alone, leaving behind the necklace and the man who'd given it to me. That night I let go of the life I thought I had, with a resolve to start over one step at a time. I spent the entire night pacing around our quiet, empty home, the life I'd carefully built for 10 years unraveling like a loose thread. The enormity of it left me feeling both hollow and frantic, as if I were teetering on the edge of something both terrible and inevitable. James had tried calling a few times, each ring a painful reminder that he existed, that we shared this space. But I ignored every one, letting his name blink on the screen until it faded into silence. Morning light filtered in through the blinds, weak and unassuming. I realized I hadn't slept at all, and in that tired haze I found myself cataloging every moment from the past few months, replaying our last conversations, looking for the signals I'd missed or willfully ignored. The meetings he'd suddenly remembered, the calls he'd excused himself to take in another room, the anniversaries he'd downplayed when I tried to make them special. All those things, once dismissed as quirks of a busy career, now looked so obviously like warnings. Hours later, I heard the sound of keys fumbling in the lock. He must have come straight from the gala. His suit was wrinkled, his tie askew, and his face haggard with exhaustion and regret. He opened his mouth to speak, but I raised my hand to silence him, feeling a fury I hadn't known I was capable of. But there was also a quiet dignity in that fury, a strength that refused to break in front of him. Why? I asked, my voice steady, almost unfamiliar. James's face fell and he sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. He looked at me as though I were a stranger he wasn't sure how to approach. It just happened, Claire, he said, his voice cracking, though I didn't allow it to sway me. That's not good enough, I replied, crossing my arms, needing to hold on to something, anything. I need to know. Why? After everything we built, why risk it all? With her, of all people. The quiet that followed was thick, almost unbearable. Finally he spoke, avoiding my gaze, looking down at his feet like a guilty child. I was lonely, Claire. Things got stale. I thought you'd understand that we've drifted apart lately. It was a distraction, a stupid mistake. I felt anger surge through me, cold and sharp, his words stinging like salt in a fresh wound. You don't get to blame this on some imaginary gap between us, I said. I was here every night trying to hold us together, to make sure you were happy. He didn't argue, and I could see the shame settling into his face. But shame alone wasn't going to change the betrayal that had already unfolded. And in the face of that hollow silence, a sudden numbness washed over me. I'd spent the entire night rehearsing what I'd say, imagining every scenario, but nothing prepared me for this feeling. It was as if my heart had somehow cauterized itself, leaving only the raw aftermath of shock and betrayal. But then he reached out, his hand hovering just above mine, hesitant and trembling. Claire, I know I can't fix this overnight, but I love you. I always have. I'll do whatever it takes to make it right. Just tell me what to do. I wanted to laugh at the simplicity of his offer, as if trust could be bought back, one sorry gesture at a time. I turned away, unable to look at him. In that moment I wanted space. And not just in the sleeping in separate rooms way, but real space. Distance that would let me breathe, think, and understand what I truly wanted. I need time, I said firmly, my voice as unyielding as I felt. If you're serious about making this work, then you're going to have to let me take the lead now. And that means giving me space. James's face fell, but he nodded, silent, resigned. I could tell he was terrified of losing me, of the consequences that would come with owning up to his actions. He grabbed his keys and coat without another word, leaving me in the echo of our once happy home. That afternoon I took a long walk through the city, breathing in the cool autumn air, feeling the weight of a decision I hadn't yet made pressing on me. I wandered into a cafe, ordered a tea, and sat by the window watching strangers pass by, all with lives that hadn't fallen apart at their feet. The normalcy was comforting, a reminder that life could eventually go on. After a few days, James sent flowers, hoping to remind me of our anniversaries past. I left them unopened on the doorstep. Each message, every attempt he made to reach out, felt like an echo, a ghost of the trust we once had. I was torn between the love that had once defined my life and the betrayal that now overshadowed every memory. Finally, after nearly a week of solitude, I decided to reach out, not to James but to Sarah, the other woman from the gala. Part of me wanted closure, while another part needed answers she might have, something that could shed light on the pieces of James that I no longer recognized. I sent her a polite message suggesting we meet for coffee. She responded almost immediately, as if she'd been waiting, and within hours I found myself at a small cafe, seated across from her. Sarah was nervous, her hands twisting around her coffee cup as she tried to explain. She was sincere, genuine even, and I could tell she had no idea about me until that fateful night. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice trembling. "I didn't know he was married. He always acted free. Available." We spent hours talking, sharing stories that neither of us would have guessed we'd end up telling. She explained how James had charmed her, his work trips, his constant promises. Every word she spoke felt like a blow, revealing parts of a man I hadn't known, or perhaps refused to see. It was a strange kind of closure, like piecing together a puzzle that no longer mattered. As I left the cafe, I felt lighter, almost free from the weight that had bound me since our anniversary night. For the first time, I saw a life beyond James, a future I could shape without the betrayal lingering in every corner. It took months, but I finally found peace. I went through the steps to rebuild my life on my own terms, moving into a small sunlit apartment that I decorated with bright colors and plants, filling it with joy in a way I hadn't known I was missing. James reached out a few more times, but I never answered. He was a chapter in my life, one that had closed the moment I found out that his love was a split promise, a broken vow I could never mend. In the quiet of my new home, the memories of that necklace faded, becoming a relic of a life I no longer wanted or needed. And with each day, I learned to love the peace that filled the spaces once filled with doubt, betrayal, and regret. I finally realized that love, when it's real, doesn't need grand gestures or diamond necklaces. It just needs two people who choose each other, every day with honesty and trust. And I would never settle for less than that again. In the weeks following my meeting with Sarah, I settled into a strange kind of routine, one punctuated by waves of grief and relief in almost equal measure. I'd gone back to work, letting my office become a sanctuary where my focus could override my emotions, at least for a while. Friends rallied around me, helping me pick up the pieces without asking too many questions, giving me the space I needed to figure out who I was on my own. But every so often, when I was alone, a question crept up and gnawed at me. Why hadn't I seen it sooner? Was I so blinded by routine, by my image of James as the reliable husband, that I'd ignored the signs? I'd always prided myself on being perceptive, grounded. But here I was, blindsided, humiliated, and starting over at an age when I thought I'd have life mostly figured out. My old friends, sensing I needed a change, encouraged me to step out of my comfort zone. They invited me to dinners, casual outings, even a yoga class or two. And though I resisted at first, preferring the cocoon of my own space, something began to shift. One evening they convinced me to go to an art exhibit downtown, a pop-up event with local artists. I told myself I'd only stay an hour, but the vibrancy of the art and the ease of conversation pulled me in. It was refreshing to be surrounded by strangers who knew nothing of my past, who saw only the woman in front of them, free to laugh and move without the weight of betrayal around her neck. At the exhibit, I met a man named David. He was a curator, sharp-eyed and soft-spoken, with a patience that felt grounding. When he struck up a conversation, I felt my guard go up instinctively, but there was something in his gaze, a steady kindness that held my attention. We talked about the art, about life in the city, and eventually about our mutual love of travel. With him, the conversation felt easy, without the constant second-guessing that now seemed to mark all my interactions with men. After that night, David and I exchanged numbers, though I hesitated to reach out. It felt too soon, and the thought of jumping into anything remotely romantic terrified me. But he took it slowly, respecting the space I needed without disappearing completely. He'd send a message every now and then, sometimes a casual "hope you're well," and other times a link to an art event or a cafe he thought I'd like. Over time, we began meeting for coffee, easing into a friendship that felt refreshingly free of expectation. For months, we kept things light, our conversations flitting from art to literature to silly observations about people we saw passing by. He became the person I could talk to without revisiting my past, the calm I needed as I rebuilt my life step by step. But James wasn't completely gone. Every once in a while, I'd receive a letter from him, meticulously handwritten, filled with pleas and promises. In his letters, he painted a picture of a man who'd realized his mistakes too late, who wanted one last chance to make things right. He apologized, detailed his therapy sessions, spoke of how he was changing, of how he missed the life we'd built together. At first, I ignored these letters, leaving them unopened in a drawer. But curiosity, or maybe habit, finally got the best of me, and one day I decided to read them. The words poured out, raw and heavy, a different side of James than I'd ever known. He told me about his loneliness, his self-doubt, how he'd felt himself slipping but hadn't known how to ask for help. There was anger in his letters too, anger at himself, at the choices he'd made, at the life he'd dismantled with one reckless decision. And for a moment I almost felt pity. Almost. It was tempting to consider what it might be like to forgive, to return to the comfort of a life I once knew. But with every letter, every sorrow-filled sentence, I realized how different we'd become. James was still grasping at the past, but I was moving forward, tentatively building a future that no longer centered around him. One evening, David invited me to a small concert at a jazz club, a cozy, dimly lit place tucked away on a quiet street. I hesitated, wondering if I was ready for an evening that felt suspiciously close to a date. But when I walked in, greeted by the warmth of music and David's familiar smile, I felt a rare calm settle over me. We sat close, sharing a bottle of wine, talking in whispers between songs. At one point, as the soft melody filled the room, he looked at me, his gaze steady and warm. "You look lighter tonight," he said, a gentle smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Like you finally let something go." And he was right. Somewhere between the art exhibits, the letters, and the quiet evenings spent reclaiming myself, I had let go. James was a part of my past, a chapter closed with all its love and heartbreak. I knew there would always be moments that reminded me of him, echoes of the life we shared. But I was learning to carry them differently, to let them be just memories, untethered to the woman I was becoming. As the evening wore on, David took my hand, tentative but certain, a gesture that felt like a small promise of something new. I didn't know where things would go with him, and for the first time I was okay with that. I was learning to embrace the unknown, to let go of the need for certainty that had once defined me. Weeks turned into months and I slowly carved out a new life for myself. One filled with late-night conversations, new friends, and quiet moments of contentment. I returned to my passions, the small hobbies and interests I'd left behind during my years with James, rediscovering pieces of myself that had been buried. I took up painting, let myself travel solo, learned to cook elaborate meals just because I could. The solitude no longer felt lonely, it felt like freedom. Eventually, James stopped writing, and his silence was the final confirmation I needed that our chapter was truly over. I wished him well in a quiet, distant way, hoping he'd find the answers he needed, even if it was too late for us. And in the new life I'd created, there was a beautiful clarity, a peace I hadn't known I was missing. I no longer measured my happiness by someone else's presence. I learned to find it within myself. David remained by my side, his steady companionship a quiet blessing, a reminder that love didn't have to be grand or painful to be real, could be simple, honest, and whole. In the end, the journey had changed me, but it also brought me back to a truth I'd known all along. That love isn't about clinging to someone who's wrong for you, but letting go so you can find someone who fits. And as I walked forward, I knew I would never settle for anything less. As I continued on this unexpected path, my days felt fuller, layered with small joys and a renewed sense of purpose. Life had a funny way of surprising me when I least expected it. I embraced my mornings, savoring coffee by the window of my sunlit apartment, journaling, reading, and reconnecting with the parts of myself I'd put aside during my marriage. Each day became a quiet celebration of this newfound freedom, the kind I hadn't realized I'd been craving. I delved into painting with a dedication I hadn't felt in years, and my modest apartment gradually transformed into a gallery of my work. Bright colors, abstract shapes, and sprawling canvases filled the walls. Friends would drop by, often bringing a bottle of wine or homemade pastries, marveling at the new, unrestrained person I was becoming. These were the people who had supported me when I was at my lowest, and their laughter, advice, and warmth were a constant reminder that I was never truly alone. One evening, at the urging of a friend, I submitted one of my paintings to a local art show, a small but reputable event for emerging artists. I didn't expect much from it, but it felt liberating to put my work out there to be seen on my terms for the first time. To my shock, I was selected for the show. My painting, a blend of blue and gold hues, abstract but with a gentle elegance, would be displayed alongside other talented artists from the city. When I received the acceptance email, I sat there in disbelief, my heart pounding, a sense of accomplishment washing over me like a cool breeze. The night of the show arrived, and I was a bundle of nerves. David came with me, his quiet support reassuring me as we walked into the gallery. The space was filled with people, most of them strangers, and I felt a thrill as I overheard murmurs of admiration near my painting. For the first time in years, I felt truly visible, not as someone's wife but as me. David's hand on my shoulder, his soft encouragement, gave me strength. This was no longer about moving on from James. It was about stepping into a version of myself I never knew I could be. After the show, David and I went for a late dinner at a cozy bistro nearby. We talked about the art, the crowd, how my painting had been received. He told me how proud he was, his eyes gleaming with a sincerity that touched me deeply. I found myself thinking, for the first time in a long while, that perhaps I was ready to trust again. Not to replace what I'd lost, but to build something new. Something I was ready to nurture with patience and care. The next few months with David were filled with quiet moments that felt more profound than any grand gesture ever could. We'd spend lazy weekends exploring local galleries, hiking, or cooking together in his apartment. The small routines we shared were unexpectedly comforting, each moment a gentle reminder of how love could be simple and kind. David wasn't trying to fix me or fill any void, he was just there, a steady presence that felt like home. One afternoon, as we were preparing for a picnic at a park by the river, David suddenly grew serious, setting down the picnic basket. He took my hand, his thumb gently brushing across my knuckles, and looked at me with an intensity that made my heart skip. "Claire," he began, his voice soft but firm, "I know you've been through more than anyone should have to, and I've tried to give you all the space you needed, but I'm in this for the long haul if you are. I love you and I'd be honored to share this life with you, whatever that means, in whatever way you want." For a moment I felt the old fear rising, the instinct to protect myself. But looking into his eyes, I saw nothing but love, patience, and a willingness to move at my pace. The past with James no longer felt like a ghost haunting me. It had become a memory, a part of my story, but no longer the defining chapter. I took a deep breath and squeezed his hand. "I love you too, David," I whispered, feeling a quiet thrill at the truth of those words. "I don't know exactly where this will lead, but I want to walk that path with you." And with that, we began to build a life together. Not as a cure for old wounds, but as a partnership grounded in trust, respect, and joy. Our days were filled with laughter, shared ambitions, and a mutual understanding that love was something you nurtured every day. Not with grand promises, but with small acts of kindness and honesty. With time, our relationship deepened, and I started to see a future with David that felt rooted, solid, something built on our shared values. My art began to flourish as well, with more exhibitions and the occasional sale. Each success felt like another affirmation that I was becoming who I was meant to be. One evening, as we celebrated my latest art sale with friends, a familiar face entered the gallery. It was James. I hadn't seen him in almost 2 years, and the sight of him standing there felt surreal, like a piece of my past had materialized out of nowhere. He looked older, more tired, but there was something vulnerable in his expression as he looked at me, a recognition of all the time and distance between us. He approached cautiously, offering a small, hesitant smile. "Claire," he said, his voice soft, "I heard about your art and wanted to see it for myself. I'm proud of you." His words were sincere, but there was a sadness in his eyes, as if he knew that whatever hope he'd once held onto was now irrevocably lost. We exchanged polite words, catching up in that distant way strangers do. He mentioned that he'd moved to another city, was rebuilding his life. There was a subtle acknowledgement in his tone, a silent understanding that our paths had diverged for good. As he left, I felt nothing but a quiet relief. The chapter with James had closed fully, without bitterness or resentment, just acceptance. David found me shortly after, his arm slipping around my waist, grounding me in the present. As we walked out of the gallery that evening hand in hand, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. For the love I'd found, for the art that had given me purpose, for the friends who had been there through every twist and turn. Our life unfolded beautifully after that. David and I eventually moved into a cozy home together, one filled with art, laughter, and quiet moments that reminded me of the strength we'd built. Each day felt like a continuation of a story I was proud to write, one where love was gentle, steady, and endlessly kind. I no longer needed grand promises or sweeping gestures. I had everything I needed in the quiet steadiness of a love that had grown with me, embracing every scar and every joy. And as I looked at the life we'd built together, I knew with a quiet certainty that I had finally truly come home. Over time, David and I fell into a rhythm that was both comforting and exhilarating. Life with him was not about chasing perfection or constantly trying to outdo one another with grand gestures. It was about savoring the small things and supporting each other's dreams in the ways that mattered most. In this life we built, I rediscovered who I was meant to be, an artist, a partner, and most importantly, my own person. David encouraged me to take my art further. He was the kind of man who saw potential in others and nurtured it, and with him my work began to blossom. Together, we rented a small studio downtown where I could paint to my heart's content, without worrying about spilling paint on our dining table or walls. The space had large floor-to-ceiling windows that filled the room with light, and I'd often lose track of time as I worked on my latest piece, feeling more inspired and fulfilled than ever. One day, while I was deep into a canvas filled with sweeping shades of blue and gold, a color combination I'd come to love for the piece it represented, David came into the studio with a familiar twinkle in his eye. "There's something I need to show you," he said, pulling me out of my painting-induced trance. He led me out of the studio and down the street, weaving through the city's late afternoon bustle until we stopped in front of a quaint storefront. The building had been recently renovated with a fresh coat of paint and a new sign above the door. As I looked closer, I saw that the sign read, "Claire Morrison Gallery." My heart skipped a beat, and I turned to him in shock. "David, what is this?" I asked, barely able to find my voice. His smile was warm, a little sheepish, but his eyes held nothing but sincerity. "This is your gallery," he said softly, taking my hands in his. "I've been working on this for months. You're ready, Claire. The world deserves to see your art, and I want to give you a place where it can truly shine." My emotions swelled, and I felt tears prickling at the corners of my eyes. No one had ever believed in me like this before. No one had ever put my dreams on such a pedestal, not even me. With a shaky laugh, I threw my arms around him, and in that embrace, I felt the full weight of the love and faith he had in me. He was building a future with me, not out of obligation or old promises, but out of a pure, unwavering belief in who I was. The gallery quickly became a sanctuary not just for me, but for the community around us. It was a small space, intimate and welcoming, where local artists and art lovers could come together. Over time, it turned into a place where people could experience not just art, but connection. A space where every painting told a story and every person who walked through the doors felt part of something greater. My first exhibition in the gallery was a celebration of all the stages of my journey, from the initial heartbreak to the healing, self-discovery, and finally, the love and peace I'd found with David. Each piece represented a part of me, and I poured my soul into each brushstroke, letting my story unfold on the walls of my very own gallery. The opening night was unforgettable. Friends, family, and people from all corners of our community came to support me, filling the gallery with laughter and warmth. And there, in the midst of it all, was David, his eyes full of pride and love, a gentle reminder that I was exactly where I was meant to be. As the night wore on, a woman approached me, a stranger with a kind smile and a quiet demeanor. She looked at one of my paintings, a soft blend of sunset hues that symbolized rebirth, and she turned to me with tears in her eyes. "This painting, it reminds me of my own journey," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I've been through something similar, and seeing this, it makes me feel like I'm not alone." In that moment, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. I had set out to express my story, my pain, and my joy, but I hadn't realized how much it would mean to others. I hugged her, moved by the unexpected connection, and realized that my art was no longer just about healing myself. It was about giving others the courage to face their own stories, to know they weren't alone. As the gallery grew, so did our life together. David and I started talking about our future in ways that filled me with a quiet excitement. A shared home in the countryside where we could escape on weekends, a dog to keep us company, and maybe even a small family of our own someday. These were dreams I hadn't dared to entertain in my past life, but with David, every possibility felt open and achievable. One autumn evening, after the gallery had closed and we were cleaning up, David pulled out a small velvet box from his pocket. My breath caught as he opened it, revealing a delicate, understated ring with a single sapphire nestled between two tiny diamonds. "Claire," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "You're the love of my life, my inspiration, my partner in every way that matters. Will you marry me?" I felt a rush of emotion so profound it was almost overwhelming. I could barely whisper yes through the tears that had already started falling. He slipped the ring onto my finger, and in that moment, I felt a sense of peace and joy that was unlike anything I'd ever known. This love was different from anything I'd experienced before. It was patient, kind, and endlessly resilient. Our wedding was small, just close friends and family gathered in a secluded garden surrounded by golden leaves and late autumn flowers. I wore a simple white dress, and David looked at me with the same steady, loving gaze he'd had since the day we met. As we exchanged vows, I felt a profound gratitude for every twist and turn that had led me to this moment. The pain of the past had not been in vain. It had shaped me, brought me to a love that was real and true. After the wedding, we bought a small house on the outskirts of the city, a charming place with a garden and enough space for me to paint, and for David to cultivate the greenery he loved. We spent our weekends renovating it, filling it with pieces of us, his favorite armchair, my vibrant paintings, and eventually, the sound of laughter as we welcomed friends and family into our new home. Life didn't magically become perfect, of course. There were struggles, difficult days, and moments when doubts surfaced, but we faced each one together, knowing that love was something we chose each day. David became my partner in every sense, my confidant, my best friend, my love. And through it all, I continued painting, my work evolving as our life grew richer and deeper. One day, as I looked at the walls of our home, now covered in years of my art, I realized that every painting, every brushstroke, was a testament to the journey I'd taken. From heartbreak and loss to healing and newfound love, my art had captured it all. It was my legacy, a story of resilience, and a reminder that we could all rebuild, no matter how broken we once felt. And as I stood there, David's arms wrapped around me, I knew that this was the life I had always been meant to live. A life of love, of purpose, and of unshakable peace. The years with David passed in a comforting rhythm, marked by the simple pleasures that filled our days and the profound depth of love we'd built together. The house we'd bought became not just a home but a canvas of memories we painted over time. Each room a reminder of moments shared, of the journey we'd taken from strangers to soulmates. It was a life woven with laughter, companionship, and the kind of steady peace I'd once believed was only for others. Our gallery blossomed alongside our life. It grew from a modest space to a vibrant cultural hub in the community, and eventually, we expanded to include workshops, art classes, and small monthly gatherings where local artists could showcase their work. I often spent hours mentoring young artists, encouraging them to explore their voices and express their truths without fear. There was something so fulfilling about watching someone discover their passion, like watching a flower bloom in real time. I knew the journey of finding yourself through art. It had saved me, after all. Now I wanted to give that gift to others. On quiet afternoons, David and I would sit in the gallery sipping coffee or wine, watching the world pass by through the large front windows. There was something wonderfully grounding about these moments, just the two of us, taking in the gentle hum of life around us. He'd often reach for my hand, his thumb brushing softly over my knuckles, and I'd feel that familiar warmth in my chest, the feeling that I was exactly where I was supposed to be. One evening after a particularly busy day, David surprised me with a gift. It was a small weathered box with intricate carvings on its lid, something he'd found in an antique store during one of his walks around town. When I opened it, I found a stack of old blank journals with thick textured pages. "I know how much you love writing down your thoughts," he said, a shy smile tugging at his lips. "I thought maybe you'd like to fill these with stories, ideas, maybe even your own reflections." I was touched. He understood me so deeply, even the quiet parts of me I kept to myself. In that moment, I realized that my love for David had become something greater than just companionship. He was the person who saw me fully, the person who made my small dreams feel grand. So, I started writing in those journals. I filled them with memories of our life, reflections on my journey, and thoughts about the future. I began to understand that this wasn't just about remembering my past, but about documenting the legacy I wanted to leave behind. Those journals became a cherished ritual, a way to capture not just who I was but who I was becoming. A few years after we settled into our lives, David and I began talking seriously about starting a family. It was a dream we had both shared quietly, neither of us wanting to rush or pressure the other. But as the years passed, the desire to nurture something together, to create a life filled with the love and warmth we'd built, grew stronger. The road wasn't easy. We tried for months without success, each negative test a painful reminder that life, no matter how fulfilling, wasn't always within our control. Yet, as always, David remained my rock. He'd hold me on the harder days, whispering words of encouragement and gently reminding me that we were enough, just the two of us. His love was the kind that didn't waver under disappointment. It only grew stronger. Eventually, after months of trying, we decided to visit a specialist. The news was difficult. We were told that having a child naturally would be unlikely for us. The words hung in the air, a painful echo of dreams slipping out of reach. I felt a quiet grief settle over me, an ache that I hadn't known I could feel so deeply. David took my hand as we left the clinic, his expression a mix of sorrow and resolve. "Claire," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion, "our love isn't defined by having a child. It's defined by how we face life together, by the dreams we choose to build. Whatever happens, I'm here with you." We spent long evenings discussing our options, weighing the idea of adoption or fostering, or perhaps dedicating ourselves fully to the gallery and the life we'd built. The decision wasn't simple, and it wasn't immediate. But over time, we began to see that love was something we could share in countless ways. There were so many children in the world in need of love and guidance, and if we couldn't create a life ourselves, we knew we could still be parents, still share our love. After many discussions, we chose adoption. It felt right, like a calling we hadn't recognized until life brought us to this path. The adoption process was long and filled with waiting, moments of hope tempered by the patience we needed to persevere. David was my unwavering support, filling my anxious moments with his steady reassurance, his quiet optimism. We leaned on each other through every step, and when we finally got the call, it was as if the universe had aligned perfectly for us. Our daughter Emma came into our lives on a rainy autumn morning. The first time I held her, I felt a love so intense it was almost overwhelming. She had wide, curious eyes and a soft grip that clung to my finger as if she knew she was home. In that moment, I understood what people meant when they talked about unconditional love. I knew that I would protect her, nurture her, and give her the life I'd fought so hard to build for myself. Emma filled our lives with a joy we hadn't known we were missing. The gallery became her playground as she grew, her laughter ringing through the rooms, her curiosity and wonder inspiring my work in ways I couldn't have imagined. She would sit beside me as I painted, her small fingers covered in paint as she helped me create our next masterpiece. Watching her discover the world was like seeing it anew, every leaf, every petal, every brushstroke brimming with magic through her eyes. Parenthood wasn't without its challenges, of course. Sleepless nights, endless questions, and the usual anxieties came with the territory. But every challenge felt like a gift, a new layer to the life David and I had built. Emma was our light, our muse, our reminder that love could grow and transform in ways we hadn't expected. Years passed and our lives grew richer, layered with memories, laughter, and love. Emma flourished, showing an early talent for art that mirrored my own passion. The gallery, once a symbol of my rebirth, became a family endeavor. As she grew older, Emma helped David and me organize events, curating small sections with her youthful vision, always eager to showcase local artists. She had a gift for connecting with people, a warmth that drew them in much like her father's. And in the quiet moments when Emma was asleep and the house was still, David and I would sit together, reflecting on the journey that had brought us here. There was a profound contentment in knowing we'd built a life grounded in love, resilience, and creativity. The wounds of the past had healed, leaving behind only gratitude, for the growth, for the lessons, and for the love that had flourished against all odds. As Emma approached her teenage years, I began working on a series of paintings inspired by family, love, and the threads that connected us to one another. The project was deeply personal, a reflection of the journey I'd taken from heartbreak to healing, from despair to joy. The series quickly garnered attention, and eventually, a major gallery in the city offered to host a solo exhibition. It was a dream come true, a milestone that felt like the culmination of everything I'd poured into my art over the years. On opening night, the gallery was packed. Friends, family, and art lovers filled the space, admiring the pieces that represented so much of my life. David and Emma stood by my side, their pride unmistakable, and I felt a surge of gratitude that words couldn't express. Each painting was a testament to resilience, to the belief that even in the darkest times, beauty could be born. I had come full circle, standing in the very life I'd once feared was beyond my reach. And as I looked out at the faces of those who had shared this journey with me, I realized that my story wasn't just about survival. It was about transformation, about how love, when nurtured and honored, could create a life beyond our wildest dreams. As the evening wound down, David wrapped his arms around me, pulling me close. "I'm so proud of you, Claire," he whispered, his voice filled with emotion. "You're everything I ever dreamed of and more." I leaned into him, my heart full, my life complete. The journey had been long, filled with unexpected turns, but every step had led me here. And in the warmth of his embrace, surrounded by the art that had saved me, I knew with absolute certainty that I was exactly where I was meant to be.